topic is economic analysis under fundamental security analysis. But before that, let us first discuss what is fundamental security analysis. So there are mainly three things that we need to understand when we do fundamental analysis. But before that, let us first define what is fundamental analysis is. So fundamental analysis attempts to measure securities' intrinsic value by examining related economic and financial factors, which can be both quantitative and qualitative in nature. So it means it is concerned with determining the intrinsic value or the value of the security. The intrinsic value is then compared with the security's current market price to determine whether the stock is underpriced or overpriced. The intrinsic value of an equity share depends on the multitude of factors. The earnings of the company, the growth rate, and the risk exposure of the company have a direct bearing or have a direct relation of the price of the share. As I have said a while ago, there are mainly three things that we need to understand when we do fundamental analysis. Number 1, economy analysis. Number 2, industry analysis. And number 3, company analysis. The economy, industry, and company fundamentals have to be considered while analyzing a security for investment purposes. So in other words, fundamental security analysis is a detailed analysis for the fundamental factors affecting the performance of the companies. So that is fundamental analysis. Now, let us move on to the Economy, Industry, Company Analysis Framework or the EIC framework. The analysis of economy, industry, and company fundamentals constitute the main activity in the fundamental approach to security analysis. EIC framework is a three-layer analysis wherein the analysis of economy, industry, and company is carried out. The logic of this three-tier analysis is that the company performance depends not only on its own efforts, but also on the general industry and economy factors. So it simply says that the performance of the company depends on the performance of the industry and economy as a whole. So there are a multitude of factors affecting the performance of a company. It is the economy, industry, and the company. When we say economic-related factors, it is the wide factors such as the growth rate of the economy, inflation rate, foreign exchange rates, and etc., which this factor affect all companies. While the industry-related factors, it is also wide factors such as demand-supply gap in the industry, the emergence of substitute products, changes in government policy relating to the industry, and etc. But these factors affect only those companies which belong to a specific industry. While in the company, it is a specific factors such as age of its plant, the quality of management, brand image of its products, the financial performance, operating efficiency, capital structure, and etc. But these factors are likely to make a company's performance quite different from that of its competitors in the same industry. So that's the difference of the three. So when we say fundamental analysis, it does involves three steps: the economy analysis, industry analysis, and company analysis. So let's now discuss economy analysis. So the performance of the company depends on the performance of the economy. If the economy is booming, incomes rise, demand of goods increases, and hence the industries and companies in general tend to be prosperous. The level of economic activity has an impact on investment in many ways. If the economy grows rapidly, the industry can also be expected to show rapid growth and vice versa. When the level of economic activity is low, stock prices are low. And when the level of economic activity is high, stock prices are high, reflecting to the prosperous outlook for sales and profits of the firms. So in economic analysis, we need to understand these concepts. First is the growth rates of national income. The rate of growth of the national economy is an important variable to be considered by an investor. The GNP gross national product, NNP net national product, and GDP gross domestic product are the different measures of the total income or total economic output of the country as a whole. So what is GNP, which is gross national product? So gross national product is an estimate of total value of all the final products and services turned out in a given period by the means of production owned by a country. So when we say GDP or gross domestic product, it is the value of nation's finished domestic goods and services during a specific time period. And NNP naman, which is net national product, it is a monetary value of finished goods and services produced by a country's citizens, overseas, and domestically in a given period. So, the growth of national economy is mainly determined by the domestic consumption pattern. Economists point out that the higher consumption leads to the economic growth. The estimated growth rate of the economy would be pointed towards the prosperity of the economy. So an economy typically passes through different phases or of prosperity, known as the different stages of economic or business cycle. So the four stages of economic cycle is the depression, recovery, boom, and recession. What is depression? So yung depression, it is the worst of the four stages. So during the depression, demand is low and declining. Inflation is often high, and so are the interest rates. So what are the characteristics of depression? So it has high unemployment, low production of goods and services, can last for several years, spreads to the other countries, high number of unused manufacturing facilities, and very rare. So, yun yung characteristics ng depression. So, during the recovery stage, the economy begins to revive after depression. So, under the recovery stage, production starts to increase. There are people starts going to work, people have money to purchase goods and services, demands for goods and services stimulates more production, new business open, and business becomes more innovative. So, the boom phase of the economic cycle is characterized by high demand. Investments and production are maintained at a high level of satisfy the high demand. So these are the characteristics of boom phase or the higher wages, greater demand for goods to be produced, more people buy houses, which creates work builders, people buy more goods from other countries, which benefits those countries. So under the recession stage in the business cycle, business produce less, so they need fewer workers. So these are the characteristics of recession. Business produce less, unemployment increases, people have less money to spend, fewer goods and services are produced, and GDP declines. So that is the business cycle. So when we say prosperity, it is the peak of the economic activity. Recession, when the economic activity slows down. Depression, it is a deep recession that affects the entire economy and lasts for several years. And under the recovery, it is the rise in a business which affects the recession and the depression. So another concept that we need to understand in the economic analysis is the inflation. Inflation prevailing in the economy has considerable impact on the performance of the companies. So when we say inflation, so too much inflation is bad. Too much deflation is bad also. Steady inflation is not bad at all for any country. So inflation is the rate of change in the price level, or it can be defined as the trend of rising prices caused by demand exceeding supply. So that is inflation. Inflation is measured both in terms of wholesale prices through the Wholesale Price Index (WPI), and in terms of retail prices through the Consumer Price Index. So, as a part of fundamental analysis, an investor should evaluate the inflation rate prevailing in the economy currently as also the trend of inflation likely to prevail in the future. So let's now move on to the interest rates. So interest rates determine the cost of availability of credit for companies operating in an economy. A low interest rate stimulates investment by making credit available easily and cheaply. Moreover, it implies lower cost of finance for companies and thereby assures higher profitability. On the contrary, higher interest rates result in a higher cost of production, which may lead to lower profitability and lower demand. So interest rates affects the cost of financing to the firms. A decrease in interest rate implies lower cost of finance for firms and more profitability. So an investor has to consider the interest rates prevailing in the different segments of the economy and evaluate their impact on the performance and profitability of the companies.
Another concept we need to understand in economic analysis is government revenue, expenditure, and deficits. Government plays an important role in the growth of any economy. The government prepares a central budget which provides complete information on revenue, expenditure, and deficit of the government for a given period. Government revenue came from various direct and indirect taxes, and government made expenditure on various development activities. Expenditure by the government stimulates the economy by creating jobs and generating demand. Since a major portion of demand in the economy is generated by government spending, the nature of government spending is of great importance in determining the fortunes of many industries. However, when government expenditure exceeds its revenue, there occurs a deficit, and it is also known as budget deficit. For financing the deficit, the government goes for external and internal borrowings. Thus, the deficit budget may lead to high rate of inflation and adversely affects the cost of production, and surplus budget may result in deflation. Balanced budget is highly favorable to stock market. So let's talk about exchange rates. The exchange rate is the price of a unit of a foreign currency in terms of the domestic currency. In the Philippines, for instance, the exchange rate is conventionally expressed the value of $1 in peso equivalent. The exchange rate is important for several reasons. It serves as the basic link between the local and the overseas market for various goods, services, and financial assets. Exchange rate movements can affect actual inflation as well as expectation about future price movements. Lastly, exchange rate movements can affect the country's external sector through its impact on foreign trade. Another one is infrastructure. Infrastructure is the general term for the basic physical systems of a business region or nation. Large-scale infrastructure is usually produced by the public sector or publicly regulated monopolies, but at smaller scales, infrastructure can often be produced by private firms or through local collective action. Examples of infrastructure include transportation facilities, telecommunications networks, and water supplies. Here are some facts about infrastructure in the Philippines. $7.6 billion has recently been approved to establish new infrastructure in the Philippines. President Duterte has plans for robust projects such as bridge, roads, and the Manila subway. Additional financing for the rural development project for the Philippines was approved. And lastly, the Mindanao Trust Fund Reconstruction and Development Project Phase 2 or MTF RDP2 was approved. The availability of infrastructural facilities such as power, transportation, and communication systems affect the performance of companies. Bad infrastructure leads to inefficiencies, lower productivity, wastage, and delays. An investor should assess the status of the infrastructural facilities available in the economy before finalizing his investment plans. So let's talk about monsoon. Farmers in monsoon regions rely on the wet summer months to grow crops. However, the summer monsoon does not always bring the same amount of rainfall, and variations in rain have implications for agriculture and the economy. A good monsoon leads to higher demand for inputs and result in bumper crops. This would lead to buoyancy in stock market. A buoyant market in one that displays price that gradually trend upward over time. Buoyant normally occurs as a result of optimism regarding the economy, which generates positive economic activity. If the monsoon is bad, agriculture production suffers and casts a shadow on the share market. For example, a very little rain fell during the summer monsoon. In some areas, rainfall was half of what is typical during the wet season, and farmers could not plant their crops. Farm animals starved. Many were sold for a fraction of what they would have normally been worth because farmers were desperate. Economic and political stability. A stable political environment is necessary for steady and balanced growth. No industry or company can grow and prosper in the midst of political turmoil. Stable long-term economic policies are what are needed for industrial growth. Such stable policies can emanate only from stable political systems, as economic and political factors are interlinked. A stable government with clear-cut long-term policies will be conducive to good performance of the economy. Another is economic forecasting. Economy analysis is the first stage of fundamental analysis and starts with an analysis of historical performance of the economy. But as investment is a future-oriented activity, the investor is more interested in the expected future performance of the overall economy and its various segments. For this, forecasting the future direction of the economy becomes necessary. Economic forecasting thus becomes a key activity in economy analysis. The central theme in economic forecasting is to forecast the national income with its various components. Gross National Product or GNP is a measure of the national income. It is the total value of the final output of goods and services produced in the economy. The common techniques used are analysis of key economic indicators, diffusion index, surveys, and econometric model building. These techniques help him to decide the right time to invest and the type of security he has to purchase. For example, stocks or bonds or some combination of stocks and bonds.
Forecasting techniques that uses historical data as inputs to make informed estimates that are predictive in determining the direction of future trends. Businesses utilize forecasting to determine how to allocate their budgets or plan for anticipated expenses for upcoming period of time. Forecasting techniques example are informed opinion and judgment, the Delphi method, market research, and historical life cycle analogy. Anticipatory surveys are the surveys of intentions of people in government, business, trade, and industry regarding their construction activities, plant and machinery, expenditures, level of inventory, and others. The greatest shortcoming of the anticipatory surveys is that there is no guarantee that the intentions survey will be certainly materialized. The forecast based on anticipatory surveys or surveys of intentions will be valid only the extent that the intentions are translated in action. Barometric or indicator approach. In this approach to economic forecasting, various types of indicators are studied to find out how the economy is likely to perform in the future. These indicators are time series data of certain economic variables. The indicators are classified into leading, coincidental, and lagging indicators. Leading indicator is piece of economic data that corresponds with the future movement or change in some phenomenon of interest. Economic leading indicators can help to predict and forecast future events and trends in business, markets, and the economy. The coincidental indicator is an economic statistic indicator that changes simultaneously with general economic conditions and therefore reflects the current status of the economy. The example of coincident indicators are industrial production or turnover. Lagging indicator is an observable or measurable factor that changes sometime after the economic, financial, or business variable it is correlated with changes. Among of the three types of indicators, leading indicators are more useful for economic forecasting because they measure something that foreshadows a change in economic activity. Econometric model building. This is the most precise and scientific of the different forecasting techniques. This technique makes use of econometrics, which is a discipline that applies mathematical and statistical techniques to economic theory. In applying this technique, the analysis is forced to define clearly and precisely the interrelationships between the economic variables. Opportunistic model building. It is the most widely used forecasting model. Model building has three steps. First, hypothesize total demand and income during forecast period. Second, estimate the GNP figures by estimating the levels of the various components of GNP. Last, estimation of net export.